collègues distingués qui ont salué ma participation à la réunion du Conseil d'aujourd'hui. Mr. President, Socrates spoke truth when he said, and I quote, "Humanity is not a religion, but a rank that some people reach," unquote. In this context, it is certain that the governments of some Western countries that are trying to promote themselves as paragons of humanity and ethics have failed to rise to this rank. This was confirmed again and again by these very same governments when they turned a deaf ear to the appeal of the Secretary General of the United Nations on March 23rd, 2020, to waive unilateral coercive measures. This is how we call it in this organization. We don't say sanctions, we say unilateral coercive measures, because they are illegal and illegitimate. On the contrary, they hastened to announce the extension, even tightening, of these measures. Consequently, they failed the test of credibility and humanity. Is not the suffering of 2 billion people caused by unilateral coercive measures worth holding emergency sessions by your Council to put an end to this crime against humanity and hold accountable those responsible for it? Is not lifting those measures against 24 million Syrians worth the immediate action by the so-called humanitarian co-penholders instead of what we have witnessed today and in other relevant sessions of the Council of the feverish efforts to promote false allegations and accusations and failed attempts to evade responsibility for economic terrorism and collective punishment practiced against millions of Syrian civilians? How do you expect any sane person to believe that Germany and Belgium, as the humanitarian co-penholders, and behind them the United States, the UK and France, harbor any goodwill or humanitarian concern for the security and welfare of the Syrians at a time where they target every Syrian through harming their livelihoods, access to medicine, children's food, security and resources of their country? In addition to the above, these countries support the American, Turkish, Israeli occupation of parts of my country and the crimes committed directly or indirectly through proxy separatist militias and terrorist organizations. It is terribly sad for the free of this world to see that these countries are assuming the role of judge, jury, and executioner at this council at the same time. Mr. President, the governments of some of the members of this council have insisted on their hostile policies toward my country, to the degree that they are completely unable to play any positive and constructive role regarding the situation in my country and the region. This is attested to by the silence and pressure imposed on the Security Council by the member states, who try to render the Council as a platform for NATO, rather than for maintaining peace and security. The governments of these countries seem to surrender to the whims and ambitions of the American administration and are fond of the policies of occupation, Turkification, and the support of terrorism practiced by the Erdogan regime on the territories of my country. These governments also support Erdogan's expansionist ambitions and crimes against Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Armenia, Greece, and Cyprus, as well as his violations of the rights of all his opponents from friendly Turkish people. Such violations were clear in the aftermath of the alleged coup attempt. You are fully aware that this coup was followed by massive violations of the rights of tens of thousands of civilians and Turkish state employees. Let me be clear. If some people dream of repeating the experience of the Turkish occupation of parts of Cyprus since 1974, in my country, we will not allow that to happen, even if the NATO itself is behind Erdogan. I invite my fellow NATO representatives in this council to answer our questions openly and without equivocation. Do you support international law and the UN Charter? Or do you support the US-Turkish-Israeli occupation of parts of my country? Do you respect what is stated in the resolutions of your own council on the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of my country? Or do you support the endeavors aimed at abandoning or partitioning and continuing to destabilize security and stability in my country as well as in the region? Do you believe in the feasibility of combating terrorism and ridding civilians of the control of terrorist organizations? Or is it the investment in terrorism permissible and desirable when it serves your agendas? Do you believe in the principles of a humanitarian war, or is besieging, intimidation, or fighting of Syrians legitimate as long as it serves your interests and agendas? And how do you explain your silence about Erdogan's prevention of humanitarian convoys from inside Syria, reaching the areas he occupies in the northwest, as was the case for the convoy that was supposed to go to the Al-Atarib region and its surrounding, and which was approved by the Syrian government on April 14th, 2020. April 14th, 2020. And OCHA has not yet delivered. If you prevent this council from fulfilling its primary responsibilities in maintaining international peace and security, then what is the alternative international reference that can be entrusted with the principles and purposes of the United Nations? Mr. President, once again, the pen holders are preparing a draft resolution to extend the effects of Resolution 2165 on cross-border activities. I will not elaborate on the well-known position of my country that rejects such resolutions, which completely depart from the assumed humanitarian goals and provisions of General Assembly Resolution 46/182. Such resolutions aim to serve the agendas of hostile governments, infringe on sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic on the basis of OCHA politicized allegations and distorted reports. Such resolutions ignore the tremendous efforts exerted by the institutions of the Syrian state and its partners in the humanitarian war, in cooperation with allied and friendly countries. Resolution 2165 was an exceptional, temporary measure taken by the Security Council in certain circumstances that no longer exist. Its sustainability cannot be permitted, nor could it be strengthened by including additional crossings that serve the occupation and threaten the integrity and unity of the Syrian territories. The only available crossings are the two crossings of Abu Kamal and Nasib. Then we have the two airports of Aleppo and Qamishli, meaning that OCHA has the possibility to send humanitarian assistance through two crossings and two airports in Syria. Instead of wasting time on the misleading OCHA reports and their pointless details, your council must address the root causes of the crisis. That would consequently restore security and stability and improve the humanitarian situation. This means ending the US-Turkish occupation and its crimes, such as destroying Syrian infrastructure, looting of various resources, and burning agricultural crops, Addressing the root cause of the crisis entails supporting the efforts of the Syrian state and its allies in combating terrorism, in addition to the immediate lifting of unilateral coercive measures. The effects of these measures are not only limited to the livelihood of millions of Syrians, but also aim, among other things, to divide my country. This is confirmed by the notorious Caesar Act, which excluded northeastern Syria from its provisions in order to encourage separatist tendencies among the proxy militias of the occupation and try to create new facts on the ground. Mr. President, my delegation renews its call to countries that have pledged and committed to respecting international law and the maintenance of international peace and security, to put an end to the politicization of the humanitarian issue in my country, support the efforts of the Syrian state in the humanitarian and development domains. These countries should also reject the political conditions and dictates set by some governments with the aim of obstructing the reconstruction and recovery efforts, as well as the return of displaced Syrians. My government reiterates its position regarding Brussels Conference and stresses the fact that these conferences are nothing but propaganda showdown that aims at implementing the agenda of some countries that organize and participate in these conferences in a plain politicization of humanitarian work and the imposition of their conditions and deep-rooted obstinacy. My government reaffirms that it does not recognize any initiatives or meetings held about Syria without its participation and full coordination. My government also renews its demand that the United Nations do not participate in such conferences in order to maintain its impartial role and respect of humanitarian work parameters under Resolution 46/182. Finally, Mr. President, inviting false witnesses to brief the Council is not in the interest of the noble issue the Security Council is striving to deal with in almost 100 sessions so far. Such an invitation is a deliberate misuse of the Council's mechanisms, aiming at distorting facts and misleading Member States' representatives. The repetitive invitation of the tools of fabrication to the Council sessions, whether it is related to the humanitarian situation or political or chemical file, highlights the degree of prejudice that enemies of Syria and this Council hold against my country. How desperate they are because they lost the bet on terrorism and sanctions during years of the crisis. The role of guests invited by the Council presidency to brief it on a humanitarian situation should be responsible and a humanitarian role, not a critical, prejudiced, and inciting role against my country's government and people. Whoever speaks about a humanitarian situation, wherever that is, should be trustworthy and well-versed in the Charter's provisions and communication disciplines. I thank you, Mr. President.